Welcome to Trauma Demystified, a podcast brought to you by Bright Horizon Therapies. I am Natalie Jovanic, your host on this journey. I'm a trauma counselor and resilience coach. So today's episode is about healing from childhood abuse. And it's a topic that is very close to my heart as someone who has experienced this personally. I know that there's still a lot of stigma around this topic, and I hope that this episode helps you identify the effects of childhood abuse and also helps you find ways to recover. It's important to clarify that experiencing childhood abuse isn't always the same as experienced trauma. While childhood abuse increases the risk of trauma, it doesn't always happen. Abuse and trauma exist on a spectrum, and there isn't always a clear line between them, and that's okay. I began my healing journey before I even had realized that I had experienced trauma. However, I also want to share that trauma counseling played an essential role in my healing journey compared to other approaches. While many adults who have experienced childhood abuse are well-functioning, it can still affect our mental, emotional, relational, and physical health. So, for example, individuals who have experienced childhood abuse are at a higher risk of developing anxiety and depression. It may also affect our attachment style, our capacity to set healthy boundaries, and our ability to trust others. However, it is crucial to understand that these symptoms are not a lifetime sentence. Healing is possible and it is within reach. I also understand that exploring this topic takes tremendous courage. It often means confronting difficult truths about our families, which can feel deeply challenging. Many of us, myself included, have loyal parts that want to protect our families. Then there's often an intergenerational transmission of violent dynamics in family systems. It is important to remember that healing isn't about placing blame. It's about acknowledging what has happened to us, understanding its impact, and getting healthier. So let's first add understanding childhood abuse and neglect. So when we are discussing childhood abuse, it's essential to differentiate between abuse and neglect. Abuse typically involves intentional action meant to harm somebody, while neglect is more passive. It means a caregiver's failure to meet a child's essential needs. Both can profoundly shape a child's development, but recognizing and naming these experiences is a powerful first step towards healing. And usually it's easier to recognize abuse than neglect. So let's first look at neglect. Neglect can manifest in several ways. Physical neglect happens if a caregiver fails to provide necessities like food, water, or shelter. Emotional neglect happens when the caregiver ignores a child's need for love, attention, or emotional validation. Educational neglect occurs if a caregiver overlooks a child's right to learn and grow through proper education. And medical neglect takes place if the caregiver fails to address the child's health needs or withholds medical care. And so please notice that there are really different ways of neglect, and it's really important that you looked at your own story to just really identify whether you have experienced it and how it might have showed up in your story. Although neglect in any form can leave really deep scars, it's important to remember that these experiences don't define your future. Healing is possible, and every step towards understanding your story, is a step towards reclaiming your sense of self. So here are some examples from my story. For example, when my mother was diagnosed with cancer when I was 3, I witnessed her undergoing multiple surgeries over the next 3 years. Her face changed dramatically as a result, and as a young child, I was really scared of these changes. However, no one in my family really acknowledged my feelings or were even aware of them, because there was a huge silence in my family around this topic. Instead, the expectation was that I should just support her and function well, even though I had my very deep-rooted fears and a lot of confusion. And I really often had a sense of terror during this time. So this lack of emotional support and the pressure to care for my mother from all the caregivers in my family on such a young age illustrate emotional neglect. My needs were overlooked, and I wasn't given the space to process the overwhelming situation. Moments like this, where vulnerability is met with dismissal, can leave a child feeling unseen, unheard, and invalidated. So now let's look at emotional abuse. While neglect often involves a sense of absence of care, emotional abuse is about the presence of harm through words, actions, and attitudes. It's a behavior pattern that undermines a child's sense of worth, safety, and belonging. Emotional abuse can include when the caregiver is criticizing and humiliating the child. So the caregiver makes the child feel inadequate or ashamed. Or if the child is blamed and scapegoated, which means that the caregiver holds the child responsible for problems that they didn't cause. And control and invalidation takes place if the caregiver denies the child's identity, individuality, or their emotions. While it can happen in any environment, it's also a common theme for queer children when they grew up in an homophobic or transphobic environment, because there is a constant invalidation of their identity and that their identity even exists. Emotional abuse can also occur through threats and name-calling, which means that the caregiver uses fear or verbal aggression to dominate the child. So how can emotional abuse occur in a family system? So for example, in my family system, there was a constant dynamic of blame. The adults were very often blaming my sibling and I for what was going wrong in our family system. So we were always the people held accountable for what was going on, but the adults didn't really explore their responsibility or their share of the conflict. And so as a result, I had internalized the belief that it was all my fault if things went wrong in our family system. As a result, I took on too much responsibility for things that weren't even mine. And I also need to acknowledge that this tendency of mine really helped me to survive in this family system because it was the only way out. So just to give you another important moment that showed up when my mother advised me to accept my stepfather's violent behavior rather than protecting myself and educating myself that this behavior is not okay. So her words sent me the message that my safety didn't matter and that it was my fault if I was targeted by physical violence. At this time, I didn't have the language to recognize that it was emotional abuse, but its effect really shaped my self-perception and also my relationships for the years to come. I learned to avoid potentially violent situations by just letting go of my boundaries and just giving the other person what they needed and really also to disconnect from my needs. And so even in these painful situations, we need to recognize that our responses as children were adaptive coping skills to survive. So when we are adults, these coping skills may not really be helpful anymore. So for example, when I had the same behavior with my partner, it didn't really allow me to set healthy boundaries and to assert myself. However, we can transform these patterns as adults and we can heal over time. So it's really about reflecting on our experience with curiosity and gentleness for ourselves to really see how do we behave right now and how might it be connected to our past. And it really helps us to take a powerful step towards recovery because recognizing a pattern is the first step to change it. So now let's look at physical abuse. So physical abuse is often more visible than emotional abuse since it involves deliberate action that causes physical harm. So here are some examples. If the caregiver hits or kicks the child or if they use objects to inflict pain. Additionally, the caregiver may use severe physical punishment or violent outbursts. Furthermore, they may use actions that endanger a child's life or their well-being. So in my case, I was mostly spared from direct physical abuse, but I witnessed my stepfather hitting my sibling. So these created really an environment where violence felt normal, if not unavoidable. So myself and my sibling, we had really different responses to the violence in our house. So my sibling went into a fight response, which often led to escalating conflict, while I went into a fawn response and where I really let go of all of my boundaries, which allowed me to mostly avoid direct harm. However, neither reaction was truly protective on the long term. We were both deeply affected by the normalization of the violence in our family and also the lack of responsibility from the adults. So witnessing physical abuse, even if it's not directed at us, can have a lasting impact because it challenges our sense of safety and it leaves us carrying fear, anger, and guilt that isn't ours to bear. So really acknowledging our emotions and without judgment is a first step towards healing. So now let's look at the hidden nature of child sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse involves any sexual activity with a minor, which is often accompanied with secrecy, manipulation, or threats. It can take many forms, such as a caregiver using inappropriate touch or exposure. Furthermore, they may use coercion to force the child into sexual acts. Or it can occur if a caregiver uses the child for sexual gratification or if they use obscene communication. So it can have many different forms. And one of the complexities of child sexual abuse is how our minds protects us. Memories can be really fragmented or repressed, and they may only surface when we feel safe enough to face them. For me, the memories of the sexual abuse remained hidden as long as I still worked close in with my family, and they started to resurface when I distanced myself from my family. And so while they were painful to uncover, they also marked for me the journey to reclaiming my sense of self and to heal myself. It is crucial to know that healing from childhood sexual abuse is possible, and is also a journey where we can reclaim our power. So the shame and silence surrounding these experiences, it really doesn't define us, and it's important that we break the silence to liberate us from the shame, because the action itself, it isn't ours to carry. So seeking support and breaking the silence is an act of courage. So now I really invite you to reflect on your own experience. As you hear these examples, I encourage you to approach your story with curiosity and care. You don't need to force yourself to remember or label every experience that happened to you. Instead, just notice what resonates with you and really be curious about your story and see what you can identify. Healing begins with acknowledgement, giving yourself the gentleness and the understanding that may have been missing in your childhood. Whether you're just starting to explore these memories or you even have worked with them for years, each step you take is a testament of your strength. Experiences like these, whether neglect, emotional abuse, physical abuse, or sexual abuse, shape how we see ourselves, how we interact with others, and how we navigate the world. As you read this, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on your own experience, and you might ask yourself, for example, were there moments in your family system where your emotional needs were met? Did you feel seen and heard by the adults in your life? Did you feel validated in your identity? Were you ever made to feel responsible for things that were outside of your control? What was your role in your family system? What patterns or behavior shaped your childhood, and how do they influence you today? Recognizing the impact of your story is an essential step towards healing. No matter your experience, know that it's possible to process and integrate your childhood. You're not alone in your journey, and support is available that will help you to reclaim your sense of safety, trust, and also your sense of self-worth. So what are the effects of childhood abuse? Childhood abuse, whether physical, emotional, or neglect, can leave lasting imprints on how we see ourselves and relate to others. As I mentioned earlier, the effects of childhood abuse exist on a spectrum, and it can increase the risk of complex trauma. And I will explore that more deeply in the next episode. For now, here's an idea of childhood abuse might affect us, and please be aware that each one of us may have a different response to it. So first of all, it can affect our emotional well-being. So we may have shame, we may feel guilt, or we have a low self-worth. Some parts of us may believe it's all our fault, while others constantly doubt our abilities or our decisions. This can include the fact that we struggle to trust our intuitions or that we struggle to trust our emotions. Some people may feel numb and disconnected from their feelings. In our relationship, childhood abuse can disconnect us from our boundaries, and it can really challenge us to set healthy boundaries and choose relationships that are good for us. We may find it difficult to discern unhealthy behaviors from healthy ones because the unhealthy behaviors were so normalized in our family systems. We might also either be too trusting or we may find it hard to trust anybody. Furthermore, childhood abuse can affect our mental health. Unresolved childhood abuse can lead to symptoms of anxiety or depression. We may also experience dissociations or other trauma responses, especially if we are under stress. Last but not least, it may affect our physical health. So chronic pain or unexplained aches in the body can sometimes reflect how our body holds on to the impact of trauma. and can be a result of the abuse that has happened to you. It is important to remember that these effects are not weaknesses. They are adaptive coping skills that allowed you to survive extreme circumstances. Your body and mind adjusted to protect you, even if those adaptations no longer serve you today as an adult. While these impacts can feel overwhelming, they are not permanent. Healing is possible, and with time and support, you can transform these patterns into strength. Recovery is not about forgetting the past, but reclaiming yourself and to reclaiming you and your future. Healing begins when we acknowledge our pain while building the tools and the resilience to move forward. So in the next section, we'll explore steps you can take to start or continue your healing journey. So what are steps to begin the healing journey? Healing from childhood abuse can be challenging because it often shifts how we perceive our family and our upbringing. However, the process is about finding freedom and realizing your full potential. Honesty with yourself is crucial as you begin. You might approach healing from two perspectives. Either you focus on your symptoms or you examine the dynamics within your family systems. Both is useful, it really depends on where do you want to start. So really choose the one that feels more accessible for you. So the first step for healing is acknowledge what has happened to you. And acknowledging the abuse you have experienced is often a gradual process. It can take time to validate your experiences fully. So for example, for me, it was easier to recognize sexual and physical abuse. However, it took me longer to really acknowledge the emotional abuse and the neglect more fully. Therefore, it was a bit like peeling an onion. The more layers I peeled off and the better I understood them, the more empowered I became. Reading stories from others who have faced similar experiences gave me hope and reminded me that recovery was achievable. So really also reach out to others who might have had a similar experience and really see what was their journey and see what resonates with you and what doesn't. Addressing neglect or emotional abuse can be even more complex, and society often struggles to recognize that these dynamics are harmful. So for example, I made the difficult decision to cut ties with my father because he was emotionally abusive, and in my 20s, I was aware that he wouldn't change. After I cut ties with him, he continued to stalk me, which led me to seek police protection. Despite his action, I faced judgment from others, like the parents of my ex-partner, who believed that it was unacceptable to distance myself from a family member. And also my first therapist really failed to acknowledge these toxic dynamics, which really hindered me to progress and delayed my healing process. So really keep in mind that it is vital that you find appropriate support that is able to recognize toxic dynamic and is not stuck in some naive ideas on how families are supposed to look like. It is okay to not have contact with family members if they have emotionally abusive behavior. So you really need to learn to connect to your boundary and listen to yourself on the distance you want to find to family members if they still have toxic behaviors. The next step is that you break your silence. So one of the most powerful steps you can take is sharing your story with someone who provides a safe and supportive space. It is especially important because the voice of shame often silences us and disconnects us more from others. So it needs to be a really safe space that can give you the appropriate support. So it could be a counselor, a trusted friend, a healer, or any type of support group. What matters is really that you find someone who understands the various forms of abuse and neglect and can validate your experiences. So if you run into somebody who blames you or who tells you, oh, that isn't true, or you just need to be compassionate with this person, it would rather be a person I would stay away from. The next thing around healing is that you develop healthy boundaries. And I know it's easily said and not that easily done. But healing is about reclaiming your agency and prioritizing your well-being. It is okay to create distance from family members who continue to show toxic or abusive behaviors. It's also okay to avoid potentially harmful situations, especially if you are in the starting phase of your healing journey, because you really also need to build your muscle to be able to be with complex situations. So remember, the process is not about blame, but really take responsibility for your healing and learn to respect yourself. Please remember that setting healthy boundaries is a journey of growth and self-awareness. Many people have parts that talk them out of their boundaries. And we also needed these parts to survive in these family systems we were part of so long. Like if I have had healthy boundaries at a 6-year-old, I probably wouldn't have survived very long in my family system. So therefore, it's really also about being curious about our parts, being curious about those parts that were protective when we lived through the trauma, and creating a relationship with them and transform them over time. So they need to be integrated in the process. So explore your symptoms with curiosity. And I think that is often difficult because we have these parts that blame us that we have symptoms. But the truth is, the symptoms you're having, they're really natural coping skills to extreme situations. So recognize how the childhood abuse has shaped your symptoms is really an essential part of the healing process. So instead of blaming yourself that you have them, really approach them with curiosity. For example, understanding that certain behaviors or feelings stem from protective responses by your nervous system can really reduce shame and open the doors for growth. So you can also check out my podcast episode about trauma, where I talk more about the symptoms, just to see to which degree some of your symptoms may be related to trauma. So I will put the link in the show notes. So through the healing process, you can learn to really self-regulate and soothe yourself during difficult moments. You can learn to understand and assert your boundaries. And you can really develop the assertiveness to develop and navigate healthy relationships. These are many skills that we never learned when we grew up in toxic environments. However, we can learn them as adults and we can develop these skills as adults. So as a takeaway, healing is not necessarily about changing the past. It's about reclaiming your present and creating a healthier future. We can integrate traumatic memories and we can work through the emotions associated with them. We cannot change the fact of what has happened to us. It is important that we start the healing journey with gentleness and curiosity. And really keep in mind that healing is possible and that every step you take is a testament of your courage and of your strength. So now let's look at healing techniques and approaches. Before I dive into specific healing approaches, it's important to emphasize that healing from childhood abuse is deeply personal. Your journey will depend on your unique situation, symptoms, and also the goals you have for your life. For example, I began my healing journey because I wanted to have healthy relationships and I wanted to break the cycle of intergenerational violence, because I didn't want to have children and expose them to the same dynamics that I had experienced. And so this was for me a profound motivator to deeply transform my life. As you embark on your own healing journey, I really would invite you to explore goals that motivate you and that have a deep meaning for you. So here are some goals that I work with my clients, just to give you some ideas. Many clients work on setting healthy boundaries. Some clients work on how to assert their needs in a healthy way. Other clients want to learn to communicate respectfully. Some clients want to increase their inner safety. Some clients want to move past self-blame and shame. Some clients want to learn to manage emotions in a healthy way. Some clients just want to create a deeper connection with themselves and really explore themselves. Each client usually has a unique combination of goals based on their individual experience. So really the collaboration with a mental health professional needs to be tailored to your needs. So now let's look at some healing approaches that can be particularly useful when it comes to healing from childhood abuse. So many people who have experienced childhood abuse tend to be more connected to their rational minds while disconnected from their emotional selves. And some people struggle with overwhelming emotions. So for this reason, a bottom-up approach is often the most effective, as it reintegrates the rational and the emotional aspects of ourselves. The most common healing modalities include parts work therapy, somatic approaches, and EMDR. Let's look at parts work therapy. So childhood abuse can lead to inner fragmentation, which means that we are more fragmented in our different aspects within ourselves. And so the symptoms can range from very subtle to very intense. So this is known as a concept called structural dissociations. Parts work therapy helps us create a supportive inner dialogue and allows us to befriend our emotions and work through conflicting parts. So, for example, those of us who have experienced childhood abuse may have parts that talk us out of our boundaries. And so in this approach is really like, how can we befriend these parts and understand them better? Parts work therapy can help us heal attachment wounds and really move forward to creating a more secure attachment. To learn more about parts work therapy, please check out episode 6 of Trauma Demystified. Somatic approaches like somatic experiences are beneficial for processing experience that may be trapped in the body. So this approach allows you to reconnect with your body and to establish healthy boundaries, since our boundaries are often rooted in our physical selves. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, is a specific form of therapy. So EMDR uses bilateral stimulation to integrate traumatic memories on an emotional level, on a physical level, and on a cognitive level. And it is very beneficial to be combined with parts work therapy because it can help us to reduce the emotional intensity tied to the different parts of ourselves. So I've explained more about EMDR therapy in the episode of Trauma Demystified that is called EMDR What to Expect, because it's a huge topic. So I hope that this gives you more details about it if you want to explore it. So while these are some of the most effective modalities, any modality should include work with personal boundaries and also should develop or teach skills to regulate your nervous system. Developing these skills is vital for healing from childhood abuse. And so it really should be integrated in any of these treatment modalities that I've just mentioned. So what are self-help practices for healing? So not everybody needs to go to counseling, and there are many ways how you can support your own healing journey. So here are some ideas on how you can use some self-help practices. So first of all, journaling is an excellent tool to recognize how past experience may have shaped your present. And it's also an excellent tool to transform those patterns. So it can be helpful to identify negative beliefs about yourself. It can also help you to identify and communicate with the different parts of your personality. Mindfulness practices really help you to reconnect with your body and your emotions. And so they enable you to recognize them without judgment. They may also help you to work with those parts that are more prone to self-blame. So I started Zen meditation in my own healing journey, and I'm still doing it. And it really helped me to increase my self-awareness, but also my awareness around relationships. Exploring different mindfulness practices can really help you find what works best for you. We are all different, and there's no approach that fits for everyone. So over time, mindfulness can improve self-awareness, it can reduce stress, and it can also help with emotional regulation. Furthermore, it can help you to create a healthier attachment style. So I would invite you to do your own journey to explore mindfulness. It's a huge theme. There are many different teachers out there. Just to give you some idea, you can explore the work of Thich Nhat Hanh, or you can check out the Mindful Movement, which is a YouTube channel if you want to start trying something out. The next step is to really explore your nervous system. Polyvagal theory is a powerful tool for recognizing the different state of your nervous system and finding ways to co-regulate with others. Learn about polyvagal theory and also find practices on how you can apply it into your life. So it can help you to become more in tune with your body's responses. So for more information, you can check out my podcast about polyvagal theory. You can explore the work of Deb Dana, or you can explore the concept of the window of tolerance. One specific form of parts work therapy is inner child work, which really means on how can we become a parent to those younger parts of us that carry the wounds of the trauma. So if you wish to start this work independently, there are many different workbooks and resources available on Amazon for inner child work. So during my own journey, I found a workbook which was called Inner Bonding, which I really find helpful and which allowed me to really start working with my inner child. However, if you feel overwhelmed or you really notice that your nervous system becomes more dysregulated, it can be beneficial to seek professional support, because sometimes in recovery, we first need to create the skills to be with overwhelming emotions before we can start to do the deeper healing work. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you or that you're doing something wrong. It's just how our nervous system works. It's just how we work in our human psyche. The next step is that you can look for education to really educate yourself around important topics that can help you to develop a healthier perspective on life. So there are many books out there about healthy boundaries and assertiveness, and it can help you identify where you are on your healing journey, but also explore what areas you want to work on. So when I read a book about assertiveness, I became aware of how submissive I had been in my relationships because submission was my go-to habit to survive. So it really helped me to understand assertiveness, and it also helped me to understand how I could practice this. It is important to remember that skills like boundary setting and assertiveness require daily practice, and so it is more like a practice you continue to do throughout your life. And your boundaries will change and your assertiveness will change, and you will notice the more you heal, the more you attune you become with yourself, the more refined you can be with your boundaries. So I really invite you to be patient and to be persistent and really continue with these practices. Additionally, it's helpful to explore books that describe toxic dynamics, since they allow you to identify these dynamics if they occur. So it can be in relation with your family of origin, and it can be in present relationships. Unfortunately, there are not only people out there who have healthy behavior in relationships. So the more you are aware of these dynamics, the more you can also explore who you want to allow into your life and who you do not want to allow into your life. So I have an ebook about toxic relationship dynamics that you can download free of charge. So I will just add it into the show notes. So as a takeaway, healing from childhood abuse requires patience, gentleness, and appropriate support. Whether you choose therapy or self-help practices, taking the first step towards healing is an empowering act. Integrating these healing techniques can really help you to create a healthier and more fulfilling life. So what are common challenges while healing from childhood abuse? While healing from childhood abuse is possible, several challenges can hinder the start or your progress of this journey. So remember, each of us has a different healing journey, so you will likely encounter your specific one. However, here are some common challenges that I have noticed over the years. So first of all, there can be parts that are scared to face the past or that feel overwhelmed. Many individuals have parts that are scared to confront the past or feel overwhelmed by the memories. This is a completely natural response. If you face this, know you don't have to navigate that alone. Reaching out to a trauma counselor can really give you the tools and the strategies that you need to prepare yourself to face what has happened to you without being overwhelmed by it. Healing doesn't need to be done in a single overwhelming leap. It is often better to take very small, manageable steps, and this will lead to steady progress. Furthermore, there can be parts that want to avoid the past. So some rational parts may want to avoid the past or minimize what has happened to you to protect you from the pain. And while these parts have allowed you to survive, they may hinder your recovery. If you find yourself avoiding the past or minimizing what has happened to you, it can really be useful to regularly engage in therapy and explore these parts first to really define the environment so that you can work with your past. And it's natural that there are parts that want to avoid it because the experience itself was overwhelming when it happened to you. So understanding them and understanding their fears and integrating them into your healing process is essential. If it comes to healing, these parts need to agree with your recovery journey. And if they don't, they really need to be integrated and understood before you can go deeper. So really remember, healing is rarely linear and it's natural to have setbacks. So if we have a setback, it doesn't mean that you didn't do it right. It really is something that we haven't looked at and where we need to look into more deeply. Furthermore, shame and self-blame can really block us in our healing journey. So feelings of shame and self-blame are common for people who have experienced childhood abuse. So you may have parts that believe that you deserved the abuse or that it was your fault. These internalized beliefs can block your healing and really prevent you from seeking support. And in this case, it can be useful to work with a mental health professional who can recognize these dynamics because they can really help you to create a healthy picture about who was responsible for what. So they can guide you in challenging these harmful beliefs and really re-educate you on the truth of what happened so that you can break free from the cycle of shame. So I would invite you to embrace your healing journey. For myself, it was a journey that is fully worth it. So I can't tell you what transformation you will experience because every person is different. However, here are some of the examples that I've seen in my life. So many people have experienced childhood abuse transform their lives in ways they never thought possible. For example, some individuals who struggled with a sense of unworthiness and disconnection from themselves have found strength through therapy and integrated their painful experiences. And they really found this sense of freedom from what has happened to them, and they became really connected to their adult self and far more confident than they would ever have imagined. And so as a result, they created fulfilling relationships and careers. Other people who really lived with an intense sense of self-blame and shame, they have found peace through parts work therapy and EMDR, and they really discovered a new sense of empowerment that they never knew that they had. And so they really could choose what relationship they wanted and which path they wanted to go. The healing journey is a journey of post-traumatic growth. It allows you to not only overcome the pain of your past, but also gain a greater understanding of yourself and also of life. Through this process, you develop the tools of emotional regulation, healthier boundaries, and stronger self-awareness. And so this way, you can lead a more empowered and authentic life. So really remember, healing is not a destination, but a continuous journey. It is a path of ongoing self-discovery and growth. And so each step you take brings you closer to living a life full of possibilities and fulfillment. And be aware you don't have to walk this path alone. And it can be useful to ask for support, especially if there are a lot of shame or a lot of overwhelming emotions involved, since a mental health professional has a different toolbox that they can offer you to work with these dynamics. I want to acknowledge your bravery in exploring this profoundly personal and challenging topic. It takes courage to confront and heal from childhood abuse, and you're doing this work. And I hope you can really acknowledge the effort you can put into that. Whether you're just starting your journey or continuing to move forward, really remember that every step you take matters. So if you found today's episode helpful, please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episode. And if you know someone who might benefit from this conversation, I really encourage you that you share this episode with them. So explore the resources in the show notes for more tools and insights. I will put them down there so you can deepen your healing journey. And I thank you for listening, and I hope you take care of yourself. Have a beautiful day.